Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Public Safety Committee meeting, work session. We have one item on our agenda today, and it's to discuss Bill 1721, which is the Community Informed Police Training. We'd like to, as we start out, by thanking Christine Wellens for doing an extremely good job in doing the packet. The bill itself is sponsored by lead sponsors Councilmember Giwando and co-sponsored by Councilmember Reamer. It was introduced on May 18th, 2021, and a public hearing was held on June 22nd, 2021. It would require the police department to collaborate with local educational partners regarding police cadet recruitment and police training, and provide for continuing education of police officers. The purpose of the bill is to create partnerships between the Montgomery County Police Department and local educational institutions to recruit and train police officers in a manner that promotes community-informed policing. As we begin, I would like to welcome, and I know that Chief Marcus Jones is here with us, Assistant Chief Darren Frank, Captain David Smith, Dr. Sanjay Ray from Montgomery College, and I believe, I don't see Lee Holland, the president of FOP Lodge 35, but I do see Councilmember Giwando, who's always, is continuing to be a good visiting member of the Public Safety Committee. We made him an honorary member of our committee, and I know that's quite an honor for him. So, as we begin, I'm going to ask Council President Hucker and Council Vice President Albornoz, who are members of the committee, if they have any opening statements, and then I'll turn to Councilmember Giwando, and then we'll turn to Ms. Wellens. Council President.
I don't think I do, Mr. Chairman. Looking forward to this discussion. Grateful to the sponsors for initiating this discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. Council Vice President Albornoz.
Well, just a couple of observations. First, I appreciate the outreach of Councilmember Giwando's office and work with Montgomery College, which this is a wonderful partnership and alliance. I look forward to the discussion because the concept is such an important one, to provide a higher level of training to our police officers so that they can have the background necessary to put them in the best position to help ensure that we're carrying out policies and practices in an equitable way. And to have that background and understanding and context is important in all work, but especially in law enforcement work. I do have a lot of questions about implementation and about how this would all work. I'm wondering why this is legislation as opposed to a program. But those are all discussions that we can have over the course of this discussion. But once again, I give Councilmember Giwando a lot of credit for his foresight and trying to identify options and opportunities that are out there. On this one, I have a lot of questions, but I'm sure we'll get those answered over the course of this discussion. And I also very much look forward to Chief Jones's thoughts and reflections on this and that of his colleagues as well. But I also want to say hello to Dr. Rai and all of our friends at Montgomery College, and thank them for their continued leadership in so many areas, this being one of them. So with that, I yield back to you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. Councilmember Giwando.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and always good to be with my colleagues here at the Public Safety Committee. Good to see Chief Jones and AC Frank and Officer Smith, Lieutenant Smith, and I appreciate Dr. Rai and Dr. Benjamin being here. I wish Dr. Pollard was here, and Dr. Greenfield is here as well, Steve Greenfield. We announced this and worked on this with her over the last year and change. But I know she's looking on from across the way. But I just wanted to say, just by framing, because I know we had introduced this a while ago, and for scheduling reasons and things had to move things, a lot going on. We introduced it back in May, and just to remind colleagues that the change that we're going through, and it's working hard as a body and as a nation, and as a department to achieve public safety for everyone, in an equitable way is it's an ongoing process. And I've always said that there are multiple things we need to do, and we certainly need accountability and transparency. We need the right rules of the road, and when things go wrong, and we need to focus our police force, in my view, on the most violent crimes, and invest in other areas for things like mental health and homelessness and the like. But then we also need to make sure we're doing the appropriate level of training, and broadening the scope and depth of the training that happens with our officers. And when in talking with Dr. Pollard and her team, last year, and we worked together to kind of develop in this 30-hour program, not 30 credit hours, we'll get to that, but 30 hours. And that would address some of the things that I think are endemic and part of the institutional challenges we're seeing with community law enforcement interaction. I often provide the context that, our 26 weeks of training or so here is above average of the national average, but which is somewhere between 14 and 34 weeks, depending on where you are. And we do require an associate's degree or equivalent credits here in Montgomery County, which again is also a great thing. But if you look at peer countries, police academies train sometimes 2 or 3 years, and have it's more like law school, and you have a much broader set of things that you learn before you hit the street. And while this bill doesn't get us to 2 or 3 years, I do think it hits some important topics and can be integrated in a way and delivered by professionals that aren't just law enforcement, the great staff at Montgomery College or another institution, because it could be implemented by USG, who has expressed interest as well, and it could be other institutions. But Montgomery College certainly worked with to design it to get at things like racial equity and social justice, understand the history of policing in certain communities and how that impacts interactions today, to understand communication and de-escalation skills from this aspect of it. So I think it has great promise. It could be another way that Montgomery County leads and does something unique. And I hope that we'll talk through all of the components of it. And I appreciate Councilmember Arwin's bringing up why it's not just a program. I do think it's important to signal that, we are going to extend the training of our police officers, and that's an important thing to do, which is why I think it's important to do in legislation. But looking forward to the discussion and appreciate being able to say a few words at the beginning here.
Thank you very much. And we're going to turn to if Chief Jones has anything to add.
So good afternoon. Thanks for having me and my staff. Assistant Chief Darren Frank, who oversees our Management Services Bureau, and he oversees the Training Academy. And we also have Captain David Smith, who is the director of our Personnel Division. And so, in regards to Councilmember Joando and his comments in regards to training, a police officer goes through their entire career of training. Training is not just the initial 26 weeks in the Training Academy. There's an additional 14-week field training program that they must satisfactorily complete. And the police officer is still on probation throughout their first year of their career, and there's still opportunities of training, and there's all types of fields that all of our officers and they must go through, to include an additional that they must go through additional training for annual in-service training that's required by the Maryland Training Commission, Police Training Commission. And those are requirements that are steadfast requirements that we are certified as police officers under the Training Commission under the state of Maryland. That is the regulating body that basically certifies police officers, not Montgomery County Police and not our training academy. Is not the certification. It is simply the avenue in which it's done. And I've always been a proponent of additional training, particularly as it relates to our department, particularly to many of the things that we talk about, equity in policing. We talk about diversity training. We talk about all of those things that we have actively done for this police department over the years. I can tell you, in 2006, I was actively involved in establishing a diversity program, a broad-based diversity program that we taught to the entire police department, and taught that curriculum for many years in order to best understand Montgomery County. That was really focused on diversity in Montgomery County in so many aspects. And I think this police department has always been at the forefront of training and where we go. I think many of my concerns, the way the bill has been introduced, I do have some reservations about the focus that it has for folks before they are hired by Montgomery County Police. I think we are at a very critical moment in the recruitment of police officer candidates, which is what they should be called as you're talking about police officers in the academy, those candidates. They are not cadets. Our cadet program is a different thing, and I can explain more of that later. I know that language is somewhat confusing in the bill. We do have a separate cadet program where those individuals who are attending colleges. In fact, I met a group of them this morning, students from the University of Shady Groves, Montgomery College, as well as UMBC, and very proud to have a very diverse group of young people that who are aspiring to become Montgomery County police officers. And I think that is a bonus for the program that we've established, that we're getting and helping young people to be police officers, but also paying them a part-time salary while they're attending college, and to help them along the way. And that helps to bring a more diverse group of people from Montgomery County primarily, or individuals local nearby, who really know Montgomery County well. So I would just say from that perspective, again, I will always say that I am committed to education as a police officer and learning. And I tell our officers never to stop learning. We'll always learn the things about people, about the individuals in which who we interact with on a daily basis. And it is probably one of the strengths that I think our department has in the diversity piece. So with that being said, I would never push away any opportunity to train. I will always have that support. I do want to make sure that we have people that are financially supported and that we are not hindering our recruitment process in any way at probably the most critical juncture of recruiting for this police department, as 20% of our police department is eligible to retire today. And that's a significant number of people that are going to be retiring in the next 3 to 5 years. So I want to make sure that is clear. So I'll just pause there and I'll turn it back over to you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Chief. And we're actually going to get to this discussion in 2 more seconds, but I too am looking forward to this discussion. I have to question, as did the Vice President, about whether this needs to be legislation, whether this should be a program, and that's part of the discussion today. I think we have to keep in mind that we are recruiting the finest people that we can possibly ever recruit to be police officers in Montgomery County, and we have competition for that. It's just like anything else. The very best will apply to many police departments, and we have to be as quick as we possibly can. And I did not realize that we were one of the few departments that requires 60 college credits. I mean, I knew that we required 60 college credits. I didn't know in comparison to other departments that some do not. And let's face facts. You have someone who's looking for a job. You have someone who is who can go to one of these other departments, and right now we have to have this discussion. It's not for today. Discussion about our starting salaries. Others have better starting salaries than we do. So you have some places that have better starting salaries. They can be hired faster. They don't have to. They would be told in this case, and there again, we're going to have these discussions, that you're going to have to spend your own money to get another 30 hours of this instruction, and there's no guarantee that you would be hired at that point. So I think we need to make certain that we do not have unnecessary hurdles so that we can have continue to have the very best police department that we can possibly have. And with that, I'm going to turn to Ms. Wellens, who's done an extremely good job on this packet, and ask her to please lead us through it.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Council Vice President, Council President, and Councilmember Jawando, and Chief, and all of our guests from Montgomery College, and AC Frank, and Captain Smith. Nice to see everyone, and I will lead you through the packet. I think Mr. Sorry.
Ms. Wellens, just Mr. Chair, I don't know if Dr. Rye wanted to say something at the beginning. I know I'm not on the committee, but I just wanted to ask, and I know he'll talk at some point, but just from their perspective, would that be okay to allow him to?
We can, but we certainly are going to call on him later. Dr. Rye, did you have anything else to add?
Well, no, thank you for the opportunity. College is involved in education and training in various spaces, and we stand ready to help county in community policing on in other areas as well. I will wait for my turn. Let's start with the proceedings. And I am also joined by our Dean Benjamin and also Dean Greenfield here.
Very good, and welcome to all. Thank you for being here. Thank you. And with that, Ms. Wellens, please continue.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And the first issue that's noted in the staff memorandum, I think, has been largely covered by Chief Jones in his opening remarks. It relates to the effects on recruitment. As you know, this bill would require an additional 30-hour course for individuals would need to pass it, and their performance would be in the course would be a consideration in hiring them to as a prerequisite to joining the police academy. So as you know, the chief expressed some concerns about the effects this might have upon recruitment. Mr. Holland in his testimony, and also the former ACAO, Ms. Sturgis, also expressed those same concerns. I don't know, Mr. Chair, if you want to discuss that issue further.
Well, I would, but I'd like to, you're on page 3. I'd like to go back to page 2 of the packet, where you talk about the bill specifics, and it's talking about expanding the recruitment of police cadets who reflect the diversity of the county, sponsor communication sessions with prospective cadets and community members, and develop internship programs for prospective cadets. Develop internship programs for prospective cadets. Is there any reason right now that we couldn't do that without legislation? We probably should be doing that, but is there any reason we couldn't do that without legislation? Chief Jones or Lieutenant Smith or someone?
Well, I would first comment to that is the fact that, as I noted about our cadet program, but that we also have an intern program that falls under our personnel division in our volunteer section /intern. So we already have an established intern program that works within the police department. Some interns turn out to actually apply to become Montgomery County police officers. So if there is opportunities to provide or look at expansion of the program, I think it is a very robust program. We're more than happy to educate this committee and the council on what the program what is the fruit of the labor and the outcomes of that particular program that already exists. And as I noted, we do have a cadet program that I continuously work to try to, and I've had these conversations to really have a larger conversation with educational institutions such as Montgomery College, that we can actually grow our cadet program and even maybe provide scholarships to students as they are working in this 2-year program that actually helps, again, provide that baseline of homegrown talent is what we have been this has been something that we've been doing for the past 6 years, that we instituted this particular program in order to create more diversity within the Montgomery County Police Department as police officers, and to be able to develop those homegrown students. So our police officers, I should say. So from that perspective, again, we're more than happy to share with you all and to provide you what the police department is already doing. They go into, and I don't want to spend a lot of time on sort of the concepts of what, but we can have a larger discussion about what that looks like from an educational standpoint and how that helps us in the big scheme of things of really growing police officers, or bringing more police officers onto our department.
Very good. Thank you, Chief. Councilmember Jawando.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, I appreciate you starting here, Mr. Chair. This is, I was definitely aware of some of the programs that Chief was talking about that are in place. I think there is always opportunity for expansion and more robust programming. And I think this part of the bill, this section, this is referencing Section B, or Section 1B after the definitions, is just to set a baseline point of like this should be happening, and some is happening, and if they're already in compliance with it and we can expand it. You know, I talked about one of the reasons we partnered with Montgomery College on this, and I want to thank Councilman Reamer as well, who's not here to co-sponsoring, is because there's 600 plus criminal justice students at Montgomery College, and while there have been programs over time, it's kind of gone in and out, is my understanding, with talking with the college and others, and I think we can get to the Chief's point, a really strong, dedicated pipeline, not just from there, but from other institutions. Of those 600 students, and the college can speak to this, vast majority, I think it's 75% or something like that, are from Montgomery County, and over half are students of color. Again, a really important population for this work. But I just want to distinguish that part of the bill, Section 1B, from 1C, which is, I would say, is really the meat of it, of this new program on these very specific topics that's been developed by the college, and requiring that as part of the training. And we can get into the points of cost and embedding it in current training and all that, and I know we'll talk about that. But I think, to your point of why we need a bill versus not, I think the meat of the bill is Section 1C, where we talk about the program itself.
Thank you. Vice President Albornoz.
Thank you so much. I know there was a lot of interaction with the college. Dr. Rai, how much did you guys interact with Montgomery County Police and the development of this? What did that look like? How was that coordinated, just to get us to this point?
So what we have done is we have created a 30-hour program. It's not a 30 credit hour program. Looking at national best practices, looking at what happens in other jurisdictions and nationally. I'm going to ask my Dean Benjamin to provide more details how he worked with the local police department and other national experts in developing this program.
In developing this program, we're working with, as part of members of our faculty, former police officers, former Montgomery County police officers, and other local and other jurisdictions, and faculty members and members of the legal community around doing this. It was a group of with faculty throughout the college in various disciplines who have been active in working around this area of collaboration and community informed work. And again, additionally, I'd like to thank Assistant Chief Frank again and Captain Smith for our time that they were gracious enough to meet with us a couple of weeks ago to talk about other aspects of this overall potential collaboration that we were looking at putting together. But again, from the perspective of informed policing and best practices, it was working largely with the faculty of the college for the initial report on community informed policing.
So you didn't meet with Montgomery County Police Department in the development of the curriculum, just internally within faculty and staff and looking at national best practices. The first meeting you had with MCPD was 2 weeks ago.
That's correct.
Interesting. I think it would be important moving forward, particularly as we're considering legislation and the development of bills, and to better understand what existing, because I think that gets to the heart of some of what we're talking about right now, is identifying existing programs and services and how this might be able to complement those programs and services. And so I think it's great that the meeting happened a couple of weeks ago, and obviously as part of this process, we're having this conversation now, which is important. But I do think, figuring out where this exactly fits into the existing construct and is important, both for implementation, but also to address some of the issues that we're talking about here, which I think is going to, it's relevant to the conversation. Chief Jones, going back to the issue of recruitment, which we all agree is a challenge and something that's very important. Is there a way to infuse, the concept is a brilliant concept. I mean, I think we absolutely need to have more context, but from 30,000 feet, is there a way that we could infuse and incorporate this level of programming into existing training? Or, well, let me actually, before I go there, I know that, based on the challenges we've had in recruitment in these most recent classes, and so few officers have met even the minimum standards in their applications, we're actually considering on the chopping block some of those minimum standards, including, as we've heard in other public safety sessions, unfortunately, we're reevaluating the requirement of 2 years of college. We're reevaluating drug tests in the past because we're struggling with recruitment, across the board. And this is a national issue. It's not just one here in Montgomery County. First, can you start there? The requirements that we currently have, talk a little bit about what those look like and whether or not we are having to reevaluate those at this moment.
So I think one of the things that I believe Montgomery County Police has been steadfast on, Councilmember Albanaz, is to make sure that we never really lower the standards for people who are becoming Montgomery County police officers. We've always had a very high professional standard. I mean, the 60 college credit minimum has been in place for over 40 years. For our police department, it is not a requirement for many police departments across even just this region, or within Montgomery County. There are police agencies that don't require a minimum of college. We require a 4-year degree for a sergeant or above, that you must have a 4-year college degree, or the equivalent amount of credit hours, in order to be eligible to be a supervisor. And of course, that rises all the way through our ranks. And I can tell you, I think we have a very well-educated police department in many aspects from that angle. I will tell you, we have really taken a harder look in. There's been discussions across the state about, yes, drug testing and how some of those standards may be loosened, not only with what the state has already done, but there's continuing discussions with the Training Commission about that, because there are significant challenges in the world of police officer recruitment right now. And this is not just something that we are experiencing here in Montgomery County, but I will tell you, I consider this to be a critical point for us as we look at making sure that we are hiring the right amount of officers in order to be able to replace those who will be retiring in that window I described earlier of that 3 to 5 year. We're already beginning to see some residual effects of individuals leaving earlier than we anticipated for retirement. And so anything that is going to hinder our goals of making sure that we are putting good people in the seats of our academy classes, and could really be a slippery slope, because I can tell you this is a very competitive region, first and foremost. That I want to make sure people understand that when most people apply, in fact, I would tell you probably Assistant Chief Frank and Captain Smith will probably tell you most of our officers that apply, they apply to multiple police departments, and they are and it is a competitive process, and it is really about who's presenting the best package, who is giving them the best opportunities of benefits. There's a lot of things that go into it, and I can tell you, as we're competing with these other counties such as Fairfax County, Prince George's County, Baltimore, who don't require those college credits, Baltimore County, Howard County. We are all in this game, and it is really a challenge for all of us to not only keep and retain that good talent, but it is important for us to recruit the best people that are out there, not to be left with what we would consider to be mediocre. And I will tell you, over the past few years, I think I've had this conversation with this committee that I, in fact, have not filled our academy classes over the past couple of years just because we didn't have those people that I thought that were capable to be Montgomery County police officers who didn't meet the standard. And I wasn't going to just fill the seats for the simple fact that we needed seats filled. I was wanting to put the best people possible in those academy seats, and I still feel that way. But I still think we have an opportunity. Now, from a perspective that says that, okay, what is the training once you become a police officer or you're a police officer candidate? I think we can have that discussion about what additional training do we think our folks need, what type of program that will be successful for all of our police officers as we move forward. As I noted earlier, we don't stop training. That is something that is highly, that people must understand. We never stop training. I think there are people who come from many walks of life who bring their different experiences, which is a great value to our department. And I think we should honor that. I don't think we should demean that. I think we should honor what has happened, that the people that we get people, I don't care what color they are, who have some unique experiences, life experiences that they bring to the job, that on the outside, you might think that they are a particular race and they don't really have those experiences. I beg to differ that we find a lot of people who become police officers who have some very unique experiences and have traveled the world and have had a very diverse setting that they come from. And then there are those, I say this often about anyone, particularly myself. I'll use myself as an example. We should never stop learning about diversity within I've learned so much about this county over the past 36 years, and I don't know every culture that we have here in Montgomery County well. I think I'm knowledgeable, but I can't say I'm completely knowledgeable. But I would say, again, that's why we stress this importance of continuous training. And so if we look at this from a standpoint that says, how can we do this from a continuous training model? I think we're spot on. But if you tell me that we have to do this prior to hiring, I think we are going to be left in the dust, because I can tell you, I really don't believe that if people see that there's a prerequisite that says that they have to have this before they become a Montgomery County, even apply for the job, I know exactly where they're going to go. And it won't be Montgomery County. We might get a few candidates, but it is going to severely hamper, I think, our recruitment process about us going out and getting the very best candidates. And so I would rather work from that angle that suggests that we can put this as a continuous training model, other than doing it the opposite way.
Got it. I appreciate those comments. I totally understand where you're coming from. I think the potential for collaboration here between the department and Montgomery College is an exciting one. There's no question about that. We've got Montgomery College is, in my opinion, the greatest community college in the United States of America. And I'm not just saying that because my parents went there. But I think there's an opportunity here. I guess, Assistant Chief Frank, it sounds like you all had a meeting a couple of weeks ago to I would assume, discuss this bill, but hopefully a broader context of potential partnerships and alliances with the college moving forward, either as part of or separate from this bill. Could you talk a little bit about, from your perspective, what opportunities there may be for that type of partnership and alliance, whether it's onboarding or ongoing training? Just reflections and thoughts from you would be helpful.
Sure. So thank you for having me, and thank you to our friends over at Montgomery College. I will tell you the meeting we had was very interesting. I think myself and the dean were kind of connecting there, and other people weren't. Where are we going with this? Because I saw some innovation there that was really kind of neat. We were talking about expanding our cadet program. We were talking about scholarships and the ability to provide folks in Montgomery County that wouldn't have the chance to get those college credits, a scholarship opportunity. And also from our perspective, you know, one of the things that we run into, and the chief, the chief was being kind in his words about how critical this position we're in. And I'll give you an example. In 2014, we had 2,300, almost 2,400 applicants for jobs, for Montgomery County police officer jobs. This year we have 400. It's a stark difference, and we have the same number of positions to fill in the academy. But to the conversation with Montgomery College, I saw some really neat ability to not only do curriculum with them, but also to educate these young people that want a career in law enforcement. What we're finding when I review files with my staff is that some folks are using very poor judgment in their personal lives, like beyond just, you know, slight drug use, but committing crimes and things of that nature. Yet they say their dream is to be a police officer. And I don't know what the impact, what out in the community is going on where these kids are learning what it takes to be a police officer, to have the integrity, to swear an oath to defend the Constitution. So looking at that aspect, being able to touch cadets, candidates who are interested in becoming law enforcement, and giving them the background they need from our vantage point about what makes them the best candidate possible. I think that's neat. The only other thing I'll add as we continue the conversation, so yes, right now our academy looks like it's only 26 weeks, but we actually bring people back for another 3 weeks. It's actually 29 weeks. And I've given direction to the academy staff to look at expanding more and changing things around. If you've heard me before, I truly believe in procedural justice, and it needs to be from the very start. Procedural justice and ethics, along with implicit bias training from the first day they come into the academy. We need to be going into that to lay the foundation for the rest of the academy class. I really like the idea of learning more about best practices from Montgomery College staff and implementing that in our academy. And you know, if I got to make the academy 30 weeks, I will, if it gets me the best possible officer to go out in the community and make connections and solve the very important problems that we're all concerned about. So I think there's a huge opportunity to do that, to look at the new material that's coming out monthly, and put that into our curriculum. One of the things that you saw with the ELE 4A audit is they recommended a civilian deputy director for the academy to be a consistent force in working on the curriculum there. And I think myself and Chief Jones and all the assistant chiefs think that's a fantastic idea, especially because they can also make that connection with Montgomery College, University of Maryland, the other institutions. So I think there's exciting things ahead. I think there's things that we can collaborate. There's direction that I've already given at the direction of Chief Jones about how we're looking at our program. So this is just a great conversation to continue on with that.
I appreciate that. So just one other observation before turning it over to you, Mr. Chairman, and I know we'll go through the intricacies of the legislation proposed before us, but I think one of the very important byproducts of the discussion we had around our school resource officers was that there was universal agreement that we needed to provide more mental health and social service support to our children and youth, particularly right now when there's a level of stress none of us have ever seen, particularly those of us that have worked in the youth development field. And it generated a really robust and productive joint committee session last week. And I, once again, give Councilmember Jawando a lot of credit here and Councilmember Rice for churning that conversation around an issue that continues to be a dialogue and discussion today, but to focus on the areas that we may be able to advance and move forward in the areas of mental health support. It has led to the inclusion of 50 additional social workers that MCPS is going to be hiring. Still needs a lot of work, but there's a plan being developed to enhance mental health services, within our schools. And it was this other conversation that helped spark, some other really great things. And I feel like this is happening again here. I will discuss the merits of the legislation, as I said, but regardless of how we advance this legislation, the opportunity here on a parallel track to enhance what we're already doing is pretty obvious. And I think we have such great assets here in our community between the great Montgomery College, but our other higher learning institutions as well, that can make us even more competitive for officers who want to advance their careers, through and to provide support for them, in addition to, and most importantly, giving them that context and background and training that there's also agreement on that we need help with. And so I think we may have to come back to that aspect of this, using this as sort of the catalyst to have this broader discussion on how we can advance really uniquely training opportunities here in our community, like the ones we're talking about right now. But I think there's some real potential there. So I will yield back to you, Mr. Chairman, and I look forward to the ongoing discussion and dialogue.
Thank you. And I'm going to turn to Councilmember Jawando in just 1 second. But Dr. Benjamin, can I ask a question, please? Right now, if someone is, I guess, in criminal justice, a criminal justice major, are they receiving something very similar to what this 30-hour program would be doing?
Well, I mean, in terms of the scope of it, when you're talking about a 60 credit college level, of college level coursework, which not only includes the work around criminal justice, but it also includes the other necessary components for a 2-year education within the state of Maryland. Now, part of what would be assumed in what we're proposing for the 30-hour training and boot camp is absolutely covered in other components of various experiences over and over within the academic preparation. But, interestingly enough, one of the things that you were talking about a moment ago when we were talking around what services and what skill sets that we were looking for within the wider police force, we have majors in behavioral sciences at Montgomery College. We have cybersecurity, we have accounting, we have social sciences work that will go and look, that does inform this overall picture of work. But yes, the 30-hour preparation, pre-academy preparation is quite different from a 60 credit degree, whether it's the direct practice or transferable to a 4-year program.
I see. Okay, thank you. Councilmember Jawando.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I'll actually pick up where you left off. I think one of the things we had discussed since last June with the college, and just want to emphasize that there were Montgomery County police officers involved in the development of this, former Montgomery County police officers, and then a sheriff and someone else. I know I met with somebody. I just wanted to make sure you guys got credit for that. We can always have more conversations, of course, and need to. But we had discussed the possibility of making this 30-hour course credit bearing, and I want to let the college talk about that a little more in a second. But so I think where maybe you were going, Mr. Chairman, was that it could be covered, and I think it should be. If you go to Montgomery College, and you should be able to take this and have it count towards your 60 credit hour degree, and then have it already done when you're already ready to go into the academy. I think for people who aren't at Montgomery College, we had also discussed scholarships, subsidizing the payment, embedding it in the current police department training, but delivered by the civilian community college professionals, which actually is an important recommendation from the EL4A audit, that there be additional training in addition to the not civilian director of training or deputy director. They also make a recommendation, which Ms. Wellens puts in the packet, around getting private sector training and non-law enforcement training on best practices. So it could be delivered within the academy setting. And I appreciate AC Frank saying if we need to do 30 weeks to do it, that would be great. I think that, and whether they come to the college or they come to into the building at the academy, I think that's all that can be worked out separately. But I do think that it is important to make it as easy as possible and as many pathways as possible. So whether you're already a student, that you get this as part of your 60 credit hour. And I want to let the Montgomery College talk about that. My understanding is that they could work this in that direction. Or if you're not a student and you need to take it, that it's subsidized, so it's no extra cost. And to the chief and AC Franks and others' point, that it's not an impediment to you applying to the academy, and that it's embedded within. I think all that can be, those are all things that I think are very reasonable and can be done. And so, but I do want to say that I do think it's very important that it's delivered by, professionals at the college, and that it be used just as any other part of the academy. You're evaluated on how you do in the academy as you're going through, right? And so that it just be included in that evaluative process. But I want to let Dr. Rye or Dr. Benjamin or Mr. Greenfield talk about that credit bearing. If you just make sure I'm right on that. I don't want to give wrong information.
Yes, that is correct. One of the things that we did discuss for the 30-hour training, we can work that as credit for prior learning through our workforce development and continuing education side of the college. For example, we do extensive work already with the county on another project around early childhood education and dealing with issues surrounding childcare in the county and what's happened, as a function of the pandemic and the access to childcare throughout the county. So we have a long history. We have a long history of that type of relationship working with the county already. And, and I really go back to something that you said that you had said earlier, Chief Frank, Assistant Chief Frank, and it was around, again, whether we're talking 26 weeks or 30 or 30 weeks or whatever, we're talking about essentially not whether that there's something value added that could be added from the 30-week training, from the 30-hour training, but where in the process does the 30-hour training occur? And I think that's a very important thing that we're going to look at. But one of the other additional things, because again, this notion of not making an onerous burden, because we definitely understand where you are in terms of being able to attract candidates and to be able to potential candidates and to make sure that they get successfully through the academy into their careers as law enforcement officers in the county. We are just as concerned as you are about the quality of life and public safety in the county. So we do, and as we said, we absolutely, from a Venn diagram, we have consensus on doing that. But one of the other things that we will also look at that we can also discuss in terms of making sure that this isn't an onerous burden. So we can talk about credit for prior learning for the 30-hour training, but we can also talk about which can be converted into college credit. But we can also talk about receiving college credit and credit for prior learning through actual training at the academy itself.
Right. Appreciate that. And one other point I wanted to make, you reminded me of it, Dr. Benjamin, is that I actually think this is an opportunity for recruitment boost of different types of candidates. And this is something I talked a lot with Dr. Pollard about and with the team. Those 600 MC students, for example, 75% of whom are from Montgomery County, majority of whom are students of color. Not all want to be police officers, some want to be forensic or other types of things. But that if you see, we're in a national conversation, stepping back a second, we're in a national conversation about what does public safety look like and how is it going to be fair and equitable and just for everyone? And how do we all work together to be a part of that change? And I think by sending a message of this is a part of it, we want to make sure our officers are the best trained and have all this background, work with a great institution. I think that sends a message to particular type of candidate that, hey, I want to be a part of this new change and this continued change towards excellence. And the Chief talked about some things that have already been in place. I do think this is an opportunity for a recruitment offensive, so to speak, of candidates at MC, those 600, but others who say like, hey, that's pretty cool. I want to be a part. I want to learn those types of things. I want to be a part of my community. And I just think it's both sides of this. We don't want to make it more onerous, but we also want to get the best people. And I think this also opens up an opportunity to get maybe someone who wasn't considering law enforcement before and wants to be a part of it now at a different point in time. So I just wanted to make that point as well. So I appreciate it.
Thank you. Ms. Wellens, I promised we were going to get to this packet, and we actually are. We actually are going to get to this packet. So you began on page 3. I took us back to page 2. Perhaps you could take us a little bit more forward here and get us back to page 3 and back on track.
Thank you.
President Humphrey, no. Okay.
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead, please, Ms. Wellens.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Back to page 3 of the staff packet. I believe that the issue of the concern about recruitment was, thoroughly discussed by the chief. I'm not sure if you want to press the pause button on that issue, or, if you have any further direction, if the committee has any, direction to staff about, further issues you would need discussed on that front, or if there are follow-up issues before moving to issue number 2 of the packet.
I think we've discussed this one pretty thoroughly, unless any of my colleagues disagree with that, but I think we should move on, please. Yes, I got one thumbs up over here, so go ahead.
Okay, great. One issue to note with respect to this legislation is at page 4 of the staff memorandum, and it relates to the Maryland Police Accountability Act passed by the General Assembly during the past session. And this particular part of the act goes into effect in July of 2022. And it has a couple of components. It discusses police officer training in the context, especially of the use of force. And in addition to requiring specific type of training regarding use of force, the Act also provides for an implicit bias test to be developed and to be used in the hiring process across the state. So taking into account those changes to state law, the committee might wish to consider, and there are proposed amendments for your consideration, incorporating into the bill those requirements of state law so that they are, tied together, that it's clear that there is a harmony between what the state law is doing and the training that's contemplated under the bill.
Well, and there again, my colleagues, please jump in, but I believe that we absolutely have to make certain that we're following the state law. I mean, we don't have any flexibility, nor should we.
You don't have any choice.
But I'm still not certain that we should have legislation rather than it as a program. And so I don't know at what point we should be having the discussion overall. But please, other members, please give me your thoughts.
Yeah, just a couple thoughts. The first is, it sounds like the meeting that happened a couple of weeks ago was a productive one, and that, and I don't disagree at all with Councilmember Jawando's comments about what's possible here, taking into account all of these, this constellation of issues that we want to address, enhancing recruitment, but not doing it at the expense of, especially in the short term, further complicating an already pretty dire situation as it is. Adding the 4 weeks on the back end as part of the overall training, as opposed to sort of the larger time frame up front. It feels like there's a sweet spot here, as I guess my point. And I wonder if there'd be a benefit to asking that the executive branch work with the college and come back to the committee after we discuss the other elements of the legislation. And maybe this is on a parallel track, I don't know, but that comes back to us with, you know, a fused concept that takes into account the very well thought out research conducted by professionals who it sounds like some of which are retired Montgomery County police officers, even more helpful. But that the current situation within law enforcement is unlike any, from what I've heard from law enforcement officials, that they've seen in a long time. So I think it would be especially productive and helpful to work with the department who will be tasked with implementing this and seeing how best to do that in a way that takes into account all of those concerns and issues. And I know how these things happen. There's 1,000 things on everyone's plate. We're going a million miles per hour. We're trying to enact change in ways that are meaningful and authentic and powerful. All of that can be true, but also just sort of a practical road forward and give, you know, the law enforcement the opportunity to work with Montgomery College and just come up with, you know, potential proposal or plan that could be implemented as soon as possible. I know I, speaking for myself, stand ready to appropriate resources as necessary to be able to enact something that does move the needle, that does make change, but do it in a way that takes into account these other issues, which are real and we can't ignore and can't be blind to. So those are just some random thoughts. I don't know if they're helpful at all, but that would be my suggestion.
Okay. I'm in agreement. I think that there is a sweet spot. I guess that's the right term. There is a sweet spot. I don't think this legislation is the sweet spot at this point, but I do think that it's good ideas. And I also like the idea, candidly, and there again, other people who are the professionals need to sit down and chat about this. But I also like the idea about when this training would actually take place, and I believe it should be at the tail end. But I don't know that it necessarily should be before someone graduates. I believe once you're, and there again, I've never been a police officer on the street, and there are people on this call that have been. So I'm looking to you. But would it be beneficial to have this type of discussion after someone has actually been on the street and learned and lived the work of a police officer? I mean, I know that we simulate a lot of it in the academy and we do a wonderful job, and I'm not in any way taking away from that, but there's got to be something that once you've actually done the work, once you've actually been in the game, once you've caught the ball in the game, that you realize there's things that you'd like to have as a deeper discussion. So I don't know whether that's something that's beneficial or not, but I do believe it should be part of that discussion. Please, Councilmember Jawanda.
Yeah, I just want to understand what is being proposed here, because I thought I heard from Councilmember Albanaz that go back and kind of work on it and come back and so we could move a proposal forward. Mm-hmm. I don't know. I don't want to put words in his mouth. I thought I might heard from you, Councilmember Katz, something different, that just don't do the legislation. You know, I'm just paraphrasing here. So I'm unclear on what's being suggested. I do think it's important to move this forward. I'm all for working together. I think there's a lot of flexibility in this legislation. I do think it's important to say that this should happen, and it's not just a program. As I mentioned, USG and others, I think extending the training and embedding it in and making it longer is an important policy objective, and we certainly need to fund. We would need to fund it in the budget per the fiscal note. But so I'm just trying to understand what is.
At this point, if you're asking for what I'm suggesting, I don't know, there again, whether this needs to be legislation or whether this should be just part of the program that the police and Montgomery College come up with. I don't want to. I want to be as flexible as we possibly can. I also believe that if it's part of the academy, it's my understanding that someone needs to be certified, under the Maryland Police and Corrections Training Commission. So I don't know what that entails. I mean, we need to make certain that what we're doing, we have the good heart here. We have the good intentions, but we need to make certain what we're doing follows the state law, follows if someone needs to be a certified Maryland Police and Correction Training Commission person, whatever it's going to take. But we need the information we're all in agreement, I believe, that we need to give the information, but it's how do we get the information to the person and not stymie their recruiting.
Yeah, agreed. I also want to just point out, we didn't get to it yet, but this also provides continuing education for current officers. It's not just about recruiting. That's also a requirement here in the bill as well. I know we didn't get there yet, but I don't think any of what you said is inconsistent with passing a law saying that this should happen, just like, we've done with other requirements, being hired to various jobs throughout the county. But so Councilmember Albanaz, what are you saying?
Yeah. Well, first, Council President Hucker's in the queue, and then I'll go right after him.
Oh, sorry, I didn't want to interrupt, but the chairman's running the meeting.
Sorry.
Mr. Chairman.
You were correct. Go ahead, Mr. President, please.
Just trying to tie the threads together here. It sounds like we all agree with the goals. I'm sure all of us want to avoid any unintended consequences that would impact our recruitment at such a challenging time nationally and locally. It seems like there are a lot of unanswered questions about the bill regarding state law and about its impact, the impact of this bill on our recruitment, and a number of other things that have come up. So I would just suggest, it sounded like what you were suggesting, Mr. Chairman, I thought you were going to say we could write a letter to MCPD and ask them to work with the college to address the goal of involving them in ongoing police training going forward, both either on the front end or on the back end, or in a continuing way, and have them get back to us in a way that is more sort of mature and developed than we are able to have today.
And I'm fine with that. I don't know that we need to write a letter. They're here. The chief is hearing.
They're here, and we have good staff documenting this. It would be good to make sure we have all the questions in one place for them to answer.
Very good. Council Vice President, please.
Yeah, what I was trying to say was, the first substantive meeting that occurred happened just a few weeks ago, right? So, yes. And it sounds like it was a productive meeting, that there was a lot of synergy and a lot of commonality in the possibilities of working collaboratively to get to the goals of the bill. And I don't disagree that, we should still consider legislation. I'm not saying we shouldn't consider legislation. What I'm saying is that let's give this team, I have confidence that they will go back and build off of the successful conversations they've had and lay out, and as best they can and within reason, try to address the issues that Montgomery County Police has brought up. But there isn't disagreement in principle with wanting to enhance training, and if this can create another tool for us from which we can recruit even more talented men and women to our police department, then this could be just a win-win-win. And that's what we're trying to get to here. So, and we're doing it in public. We're doing it somewhat awkwardly. I'm not a professional in this space. I'm not going to be the one tasked with implementing it, but I trust the people that are. And so that would be my suggestion, Councilmember Jawando, is just that there be maybe one or two more meetings, and that we come back with a collective holding. There may be some disagreement, but at least getting a little bit closer to addressing the concerns and still advancing this in a way that is productive and authentic and creative and gets what we want to achieve here.
I'm in agreement with you, Mr. Vice President.
And I'd like to hear from, I'm making a meeting here that I'm probably not going to attend. So I'd love to hear from, and Councilmember Jawando, you as well. You've been, just such a great bridge and such a great facilitator here. But Dr. Rye, Dr. Benjamin, Chief Jones, Assistant Chief Frank, would that make sense to give you guys a little bit longer of a runway to come back to us with a plan that is more in line with the concerns raised, but with the merits of what we're talking about?
I see Chief Jones shaking his head yes. I'm assuming.
Absolutely. I think that, at the end of the day, I think we're brought to the table as partners, and it's something that's going to highly impact our police department. We always are willing to have a conversation, and I think we are more than committed to, as you've heard from Assistant Chief Frank, about what we look as exciting opportunities in our partnership with Montgomery College. And I think that we have an excellent opportunity to do some things that is expansive beyond the training. And I'm more than willing to sit down with Montgomery College and have those conversations centered around what seems to be some exciting curriculum that our officers can be a part of. And I'm looking at the whole police department and not just looking at it from a recruitment standpoint. I think it's an important piece here. So I am totally committed to having those conversations. Logistics, we got to work out quite a few things, but to really have a sit down and see what would it look like, I think it would be an opportunity for us to look at it and have those conversations while developing and maintaining an excellent partnership with Montgomery College or the universities of Shady Groves or any other educational institution out there that will be able to work with us from that perspective, because we always have officers who are always looking for expansion of college credits and things of that nature as they work full time and provide dedicated service to this county.
Very good. Dr. Ray.
Yeah, so thank you very much. College is completely willing to collaborate in whatever works best for the county and community. We will be delighted with the opportunity to work with the police department and enhance the 30-hour credit, that 30-hour program that has been developed. We are also interested in talking about our criminal justice program, where there are 700 students, highly diverse, a lot of Hispanic students as well. Cybersecurity, behavioral science, psychology, there are lots of opportunities there. Broadly speaking, college is working with several other areas, whether it's teaching or nursing or IT areas, in a very similar way. And what is the common denominator in all this is preparing a homegrown talent pipeline. Talent shortages are there in various different sectors. Just in teaching, I was looking at the data the other day, 64,000 teachers are needed in Maryland over the next 10 years. So again, working with the school system, we're working with the university system, universities at Shady Grove. UMBC offers a lot of programs at US universities at Shady Grove, and our programs are completely articulated with UMBC's program and also with University of Maryland's program, and also with several other major online providers. So criminal justice program, for example, Southern New Hampshire University, University of Maryland Global Campus, our programs are completely articulated with them. So we look forward to working on the next steps.
Thank you. Dr. Benjamin, I see you shaking your head yes. Did you have anything else to add, please?
No, and again, it's the agreement that we all share the same goals and looking at making sure that our public safety and the college, that we collaborate to support the county and the tremendous opportunity that it provides the residents of the county. And there are a lot of options. And I think that we have made some really good inroads in terms of, as you were saying, continued collaboration to address this, and I think the last thing that I would like to say is that, around the issues of recruiting, as everybody will attest to, this existed well before we started this process. And as important as the aspirations are to achieving these outcomes, what's happening right now can only go so far, and maybe it is time to start looking at some of these more innovative approaches to achieve these outcomes that we all so direly want.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. Assistant Chief Frank.
I'm a bit of a training geek, and I'm I'm looking forward to the discussion. I mean, listening to you speak, Councilmember Katz, I was debating in my head. Actually, we were debating about an hour before this session, the merits of putting the training before you actually get into the law enforcement curriculum or midway through or after. So we're open for the discussion. I think it's terrific. I think the other thing to remember too is obviously MPSTC is going to put some requirements forward for training that we need to follow as when you talk about ongoing training for officers. But I think one of the other, as I was sitting here and again reflecting on what we were discussing, is one of the important things about training our current officers is that we reach out to them in a way that's talking with them, not at them. And that's how you retain the knowledge. And that's how you get the internalization of what we're all trying to accomplish for our community. So neat discussions. Obviously, my support and my academy staff support, and the big boss said we're doing it. So all the way around, we're in a good place.
All right. Anyone else on this? Okay.
So we'll be back later.
Yes, and Ms. Wellens, we do sincerely appreciate your packet. You might not have gotten through every word of it, but you really got us through to where we needed to be. I sincerely appreciate that.
And a reasonable time frame. I mean, we're not talking months. It'd be great. I mean, this is speaking for myself. I'd love to revisit this as soon as possible, but also be reasonable about giving you guys the time and space to come back with some concepts that we can discuss, not eliminating the legislative component, but seeing how we can fit all these pieces together in this jigsaw puzzle. But I mean, for me, this would be just after the holiday break, when I would want us, to come back, if that's reasonable of a time frame for the team to be able to meet.
It would work for me, and at that point, you would be Mr. President. So we certainly will follow your lead on that as well. But yes.
Councilmember Jawando, does that time frame work for you?
I appreciate you asking, Mr. Vice President. Yes, I think that's great. And I also want to thank Ms. Wellens, because I think though we didn't get to it all, she addresses a lot of these points and actually provides potential solutions in the packet. So I think as a baseline for the meeting that will happen, I think the packet will be a good working document or starting point for that meeting. But yes, I absolutely, that sounds great.
And I do, to the point about sooner rather than later, we know that not just in police recruitment, but whether it be teacher recruitment, we can start the list. We know that when someone gets in, they apply in many places, but the first group that says, oh, by the way, would you like to work here? Many times that's where they go, and we're losing some extremely good recruits because that we're not as quick as as our competition is. So we need to do this as quickly as possible, as correctly as possible, but as quickly as possible so that we can get ourselves back on track. And we also need, and I see Ms. Farag is on the call as well, that we need to have a major discussion on starting salaries for our public safety people, because that is really something that is not helping us as well. So, Very good. So with that, we are going to thank everyone for being here, and we're going to say that we're adjourned. Thank you very much. Have a good rest of the day. Thanks.
Thanks, everyone.
There were 13 pedestrians and 1 bicyclist killed.